What's up? It's Wills, and today on the Miata build, we're going to be refreshing the ignition system. So here's the parts we're going to replace. I got a new coil pack. This came with the car when I bought it, but I just never installed it until now. Not really sure if it's OEM. I highly doubt that it's OEM, but it looks like a good quality piece. So here's my old wires and coil pack. Not really sure if these were OEM or not. The wires are definitely not OEM. Not sure when these were replaced by the previous owner, but figured before I start the car up and take it to the dyno, I should make sure it has a solid ignition system to run off of. For the spark plugs, I did some research, and a very popular plug for turbo Miatas is the NGK BKR7E. So here's the part number. Ordered these off Amazon, and then I got a set of NGK spark plug wires. I decided to go with NGK because these are definitely high quality OEM replacements. The NGK blues are also high performance, so they should be able to withstand more heat and conduct electricity better. So first up, let's go ahead and get started with taking off the current spark plugs. So to get the spark plugs out, we have a ratchet with a few extensions and a 5/8 spark plug socket. Make sure you have a spark plug socket. They have this little rubber insert inside so that when the spark plug is loose, this little rubber piece inside holds onto the spark plug so you can pull it out. So here's the plugs out of the car. Spark plugs that were in it before are NGK BKR6Es. As you can see, the spark plugs are pretty fouled up in cylinders 3 and cylinders 2 through 4. Had oil on the plugs when I pulled them out. So it's a good thing we're replacing these because they could definitely cause misfiring issues. So from what I've read online, most turbo Miata guys are running between 0.3 or 0.75 millimeters. And some people are running even as low as 0.02 or 0.5 millimeters. That's a pretty big range. Also, what I've read online is that you want to run a smaller gap on a turbo car to prevent misfires, especially since the stock Miata ignition system can only handle so much. If you wanted to safely run a larger gap on your spark plugs on a turbo Miata setup, then you'd probably have to upgrade to coil over plug. Some common upgrades would be LS coils, Audi R8 coils, Toyota coils. There's lots of options out there, but for now I'm going to be running an OEM setup. So one of the downsides of running such a small gap is that your spark plugs could have a tendency to foul more often. Since the gap is so small, buildup can eventually cause this gap to be smaller. For me, I won't be driving this car that often, and I won't really mind replacing the spark plugs if I do see any issues. But if you're looking for more longevity and you don't have a turbo application, then running the stock spark plug gap should probably be fine if you're running NA. So here's the new spark plugs. Let's go ahead and check all the gaps. See 0.8 millimeters, 0.032. So the gap I'm gonna run is 0.025 or 0.63 millimeters. So to make the spark plug gap smaller, there's a few things we can do. We can go ahead and tap it on something metal like this until the gap gets to the spec that we want, or we can use a tool. So I recently picked up this tool, and this will allow me to slowly adjust the gap little by little until I get to the desired spec. So this is the method we're going to be using to get all the spark plugs into spec. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten it just a little bit at a time. We're going to check our spec. A little bit too much. All right. 0.26 doesn't fit. 0.025 fits just perfect. So what we're going to do is go ahead and just repeat that for all 4 spark plugs. And then another method you can use to check your spark plug gap are these spark plug gapping tools. Personally, I find these to be really inaccurate, and since they taper, I feel like it's hard to get a really good reading on exactly how large the gap is. These are still useful though. If you make the gap too small, you can go ahead and use this to open it back up again. But I would suggest not using this to actually get a accurate gap reading. All right, so here's the gap plug next to the plug that hasn't been gapped. All right, so all the spark plugs are gapped. I'm gonna go ahead and put some copper anti-seize on all the threads before I stick it in the engine. All right, here's the spark plugs with the anti-seize on them. Make sure you don't get anything on the first few threads, and especially don't get anything on the tip as well. So now that that's finished, let's go ahead and get these installed in the car. So first up, I'm gonna go ahead and get them hand tight, and then we'll go ahead and torque them down once they're seated. So the torque spec for the spark plugs is 11 to 17 foot-pounds. I set my torque wrench to 13 foot-pounds, and if you don't have a torque wrench, pretty much just want to get them nice and snug. All right, next up, let's go ahead and get on the new coil pack. For the 1.8s, the coil packs are held on in 3 places. 2 bolts up top, 1 on the bottom. I'm not going to go and transfer over from it to here or even install it with this bottom bolt. This bolt is super hard to get to. It's right next to the firewall. And from what I've read online, a lot of people have been fine just running the 2 bolts that go onto the valve cover. Also, another thing I did was I went ahead and marked which cylinder corresponds to each plug on the coil pack. This is just a quick way so I can identify that the wires are going to the right cylinder. And if you're wondering what the bolt size is for these, they are M8 by 1.25 by 20 millimeter. So one quick thing I'm going to do before I get the coil pack on is I'm going to get some of this dielectric grease, and I'm going to put it onto electrical connectors for the coil packs. So dielectric grease will help to prevent corrosion, and it's a type of grease where it allows electricity to flow through it. So this is safe for electrical connections, but just a bit of extra safety to make sure everything is nice and protected. All right, so let's go ahead and get the wires in. I went and put a little bit of dielectric grease on all the connections. This should help protect the spark plugs and prevent corrosion. And then I also put some dielectric grease on the connections on the coil pack. So let's go ahead and get them in. And to finish it off, we're going to go ahead and wipe down the wires with some Chemical Guys VRP. This should keep the rubbers looking nice and new for a long time. Alright, that's all for this install. Hope you enjoyed the video or found it helpful. If you did, go ahead and give it a like. And if you want to keep following the build, definitely subscribe, because next up we're going to be doing the first startup on the new turbo setup. So stay tuned. Well, hope you have a great day. Peace.